I worked with English PEN, which is the London branch of the literature and human rights organization PEN International.
This summer, I had the honor to work at the Society for Community Organization in Hong Kong, alongside a group of passionate local human rights activists as a Global Human Rights Fellow.
This summer, I completed the field portion of my fellowship at the World Food Program, which is the food arm of the United Nations. I spent my time at the WFP focusing on the topics of climate change, human rights, and food security in East Africa.
This summer, I traveled over 7,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean to Kigali, Rwanda, to serve as a community health and key populations intern at Health Development Initiative. The scope of my human rights work was around designing a training manual to contextualize and address the key social, cultural, and health-based consequences that are facing sex workers in Rwanda. Now, for the actual creation of the manual, I required the analysis of a few hundred resources. Along with that, it required multiple interviews with human rights professionals, health workers, and sex workers in the urban population of Kigali. My positive experiences were really impactful to me. One of them being is having the opportunity to work under seasoned professionals who work in the global health realm. Being able to see them work and being able to work with them to create a long-lasting project kind of gave me a snapshot of what I hope my life will be as my professional and educational career goes on.
This summer, I went to Florida and worked with Human Rights Defense Center, HRDC. Mass incarceration occurred in 1980s, approximately the same time with war on drugs. Over the past few decades, the prison population in this country has increased by 500%. Now, with only 5% of the world's population, this country now has 25% of the world's prisoners. Prisoners' rights is also a highly controversial issue. I mean, for everyone here, we would agree that health, education, access to employment are fundamental human rights. But should prisoners have these rights? Should we deny these rights to those prisoners simply because they did something wrong before? I believe that simply because of the fact that you are a human being, you are endowed with certain rights. In terms of health, you should live in a safe environment, should not be exposed to diseases. And if you do get disease, you should have access to health care.
I want to speak a bit more broadly this evening about the research dimensions of my project and also what I believe can be gained by viewing all of these complicated forces in the suburbs, specifically from a human rights standpoint. So I'm going to touch on counterterrorism policy because a huge question underscoring this project is whether the French Republic can both denounce this very evident problem that it has with terror while also equally as strongly denouncing Islamophobia. The physical geography of the banlieue and its placement on the outskirts of the city, the outer city and not the inner city, also makes me interested in the question of urban planning here. How spatial segregation impacts access to rights and opportunity, how public housing can be conceptualized within rights discourse concerning living standard, and finally, the colonial question underscoring the fact that many North Africans living in these spaces in France today were either part of the imperial migration process or descendants of it. And the fact that their placement in these suburbs is still tied to this very complicated history that nobody really talks about.
The Gallatin Fellowship allowed me to undertake a mammoth vision that was transformed into reality thanks to the NGO Health Right International. My project was assessing depression, PTSD, and access and barriers to mental health services amongst Tibetan refugees in Kathmandu, Nepal. Mental health is deemed such a taboo topic in South Asia. It is something that is not talked about. It is brushed under the rug as if it will go away or it will fix itself. I was very curious to know whether Tibetan refugees who faced numerous trials and tribulations exhibited signs of depression and PTSD, and whether they even knew where to go in order to speak about these issues. Human rights is a global and international field, And we, as empowered citizens of today, need to stand up for what's right and need to stand up for injustices around the globe.